Hello, dear friends. Today, I have the honor to introduce my longtime friend and attorney, Dr. Thomas O. Mason from Lynn, Massachusetts. Today, we are going to discuss a subject that is studied and talked about in many different forums, World War II. Today, our lives in many ways are still affected by it. Dr. Mason's research on the history for this destructive war will give us a simple and less scholastic way of presenting most, if not all, the salient event of the European theater. Hello, Tom. How are you? Nice to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure. You know why you have that interest on World War II?
Yes, I was a history major in college, high school, junior high. I always was fascinated by history. So I majored in it in college, and it's my first love. But I thought about being a professor, college, getting my master's, doctorate when I was younger, but law school kind of drew me in, I wanted to be a lawyer as well. So, but constantly reading about history, it's a fascinating subject. It's human behavior. And so, it just piqued my interest when I was young. It's never faded.
Why World War II is broken up in two sections, European theater and the Pacific theater. Can you explain why?
Yes, because basically it was two separate wars. You had the European continent, which was at war. So obviously the military and government leaders called it the European theater. Mm-hmm. They called the Pacific, after the Japanese got involved, the Pacific theater, because the war was fought, Pacific Islands, Philippines, Guadalcanal, all the different island chains, ultimately over to Japan, pretty much itself. But it was to differentiate the different types of geographical areas. That's why they labeled it.
Oh, and can you tell me and our audience about President Paul von Hindenburg in 1932 asked Hitler to accept the nomination of Chancellor, and Hitler accepted in 1933, What prompted Hitler to convince President von Hindenburg to declare a state of emergency?
Well, a couple of things. He was quite advanced in age, Hindenburg. There was the fire, the Great Fire, and they blamed, Nazis blamed the communists. So things were getting out of control in Germany after World War I. Inflation, obviously the persecution of the Jewish people. So Hindenburg, again, was at an advanced age. Hitler was consolidating power. He probably would have done it anyways, with or without his blessing. Many say that Hindenburg basically was forced to do it. And so at the end of the day, he was such an age that he couldn't handle what was going on. So ultimately, Hitler consolidated his power, became dictator.
Okay. And why did Hitler choose to invade Poland and not another country with these armies?
Well, Poland borders Germany, as you know. It's on the eastern part of Germany, borders the eastern part of Germany. And he looked at the Polish people as subhuman. I mean, the Nazis were not nice people. They were into the occult, among other things. But they looked at the Polish people as subhuman. Hitler wanted land, he wanted space. Mm-hmm. He wanted to colonize, pretty much, all of Europe. That was his goal. And so, as far as Poland, that was the easiest target. Poland's military was not in any shape to fight Germany's revamped, revised, mechanized air force, tanks. I mean, they had been building up their military in violation of the Versailles Treaty of World War I, the end of World War I. So it was an easy victory for Hitler. It was the Blitzkrieg. That's when he tested out his first real major mechanized warfare with the Luftwaffe, the Blitzkrieg, and Poland couldn't handle it. They surrendered.
Can you describe to me the way Hitler was able to defeat Poland so fast? What was his movement in Europe in a way to trap almost Poland?
Well, it was his mechanized divisions, his armies, the tanks. German tanks were incredible. Again, the Blitzkrieg, you know, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, just constant around the clock. It was a lightning fast operation, really no rest. So the world hadn't seen that type of, they hadn't seen that type of warfare, you know. Yeah. It wasn't, World War I was nothing like that. And so they, you know, constant onslaught, constant quick attacks on the enemy. And that's what happened to Poland. They just, at the end of the day, they didn't have the manpower nor the resources to defeat Germany.
What were the most destructive battle of the European theater?
Oh, well, Stalingrad, without question, on the Eastern Front. I mean, it was a bloody, bloody battle. It was a good almost 2 years, I believe, year and a half. It was just basically house to house at the end of it. The Soviet military and the Russian people were very, very, very dogged, very determined, and the Russian winters, I should say, the winters were harsh. Hitler's troops weren't prepared. The supplies were short. The supply lines were not making it to the front. They weren't dressed appropriately. They weren't used to those harsh winters, and ultimately, they couldn't move their tanks, frozen. And the Russians were very adept. They had fighters come in from the north, okay? They were trained specifically. Yeah, you know, Stalin had armies up in the north, up in the Arctic, came down. And so the German troops were pretty much shell-shocked. After they got into Stalingrad, you know, the Russians destroyed a lot of the city themselves, like they did with Napoleon back in 1803, I believe it was, when he was invaded Moscow. It was burned. So the Russians weren't going to leave the Germans anything, but Stalingrad became a house-to-house, street-to-street, block-to-block battle. It was very, very, very horrific.
Yeah. Do you think that the Battle of Stalingrad, with the Desert Storm, when the American and Allied troop went into Baghdad, and would you compare them almost the same as a house-to-house combat or bombarding the city before of it? Is there any connection with it?
No.
No.
You know, Baghdad was pretty much over when it started. You know, the war was quick. General Schwarzkopf was, you know, he had an array of weapons. I mean, you're talking, what was it, 60, almost 70 years later. U.S. military technology just overwhelmed the Iraqis, you know, so, and that was a desert, you know, it was more urban, much more urban in Stalingrad than in Iraq. Again, there's no comparison, you know. I mean, the casualties, the struggle, it was over quick. You know, I think it was in 90 days it was over in Iraq or less.
So why did Hitler, even though that on the eastern side of Poland there was the Russian troop coming in. How that, if that stopped Hitler to go any further, the Russian troop being on their side and Hitler signing a pact of non-aggression, there was a time delay in that case, or something that happened at different time? How the thing worked out without shooting each other immediately?
Well, the Russians only went so far in the eastern part of Poland. Hitler stopped Warsaw, maybe a little bit east of it. They had already divided it up, and they had an agreement. You know, the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact of 1939, I believe it was. So they had it already divided. And so when Hitler invaded Operation Barbarossa in June of '41, Stalin was shocked. They said he was like inconsolable for a day or two. Couldn't believe it, you know, because he had gone, you know, he had just purged his military in the mid to late 30s. So they were kind of decimated, the officer corps. So he was shocked when Hitler went after the Soviet Union, made his move. And he was close. He was with, 10 miles, I believe, or so of Moscow. And then he detoured south to the oil fields. They needed oil for, with the war machine. So, but yeah, they had an agreement, whether it was formal or not, they had an agreement. You take the eastern part of Poland, we're taking this part of Poland, okay? So Stalin was no angel, as far as that goes. He was an angel anyways, but.
Well, one question I haven't really stays too much about concentration camps. And we mostly, a lot of people know about Auschwitz, Dachau, Buchenwald, but there was one particular one that it wasn't quite known too well, and that's, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, because that's a some kind of
you might get me on this one.
Eastern language.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a concentration camp called Stadov, 20 miles east of Danzig, which is today, present day, Gdansk.
Mm-hmm.
And they was very known for being initially not that brutal, but towards the last 2 years of the war, it was even worse than Auschwitz and Buchenwald and all the other famous ones.
What do you mean by worse?
Worse because not having the same amount of prisoner, but they were killing it at a higher rate. So even though they didn't receive, they didn't get the same amount of people, that Jews, that LGBTQ, mental illness, they weren't as many as in Auschwitz, but proportionally, the proportion was much different and much higher. Because they even have the March of Death when the Russians start to go forward east and they had to retreat. Instead to let these people go, they forced them into those March of Death and they died, most of them.
They were just sadistic. They
Yes.
were sadistic people, Not the German people as a whole, but the Nazis. You have to differentiate that, So their ideology was, straight from hell, quite honest. To me, I don't think there was any concentration camp light. I think they were all heavy.
Yeah.
They were all horrific. The atrocities committed, the Nuremberg trials. I mean, you saw it all laid out there, 1946. It was awful, horrendous, which leads to our point we're talking about. As a result of that, it led to the impetus, the United Nations with Israel. We go back to 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, but that really propelled the establishment of Israel. They were demanding their own land, their own country. And so 1948, they did. They finally were able to recognize that. And I think that clearly World War II led to the founding of the nation of Israel. And that's why I tell, today, World War II has directly affected this world to this day, because look at the Middle East. Even now, look what we're going through. In 1948, they were attacked, I believe, within 24 hours of them declaring their independence, the nation of Israel. And then there were, 1967, 1973, they were in pretty much a state of war, throughout their entire existence. They're tough people.
Tom, we're here again talking about some more about the Second World War.
Thank you.
And
enjoying myself. Thank you.
Well, it's actually something that I really share with you, the fact that it's nice to talk about those events.
Well, I don't really get to talk about it with many people because nobody's interested in it.
That's right.
We live in a 24-second culture now, not 24 hours.
Yeah.
Everything's just, knowing the phrase, who cares?
That's right, which is
But
actually we should never forget what happened on the Second World War.
Of course.
So now we're moving on to the D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. And we know about the Omaha Beach and all the others, that it was a very, very tough battle. And even though the German, they reinforced a little further north, thanks to our intelligence. So maybe you want to tell us how the intelligence worked in that time, and how they were able to deceive the German so that they landed on Normandy. It was not that fortified as a little further up north.
Right. Good question. Well, they had the Allies, Britain, France, U.S., they had dummy tanks, artillery equipment, all blown up. So the planes thought they were looking at, actual machines when they weren't. So I think General Rommel, German general, he tried to get them to keep more resistance, more weapons up in Normandy, but he lost the battle, with the other generals. So what happened, the Battle of Britain preceded all that. The British hung on tough because Hitler never made an amphibious invasion over to England. They didn't think they could be successful. So, but the Royal Air Force held its own, more than held its own against the German Luftwaffe, and ultimately prevailed.
Would you classify as the Luftwaffe at the time technologically more advanced than the Royal Air Force?
Well, they were greater in number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say they were more advanced. Gotta remember, Hitler was building up his army in the Air Force all during the 30s. He came into power. Churchill, who I admire immensely, he just would not ever, he said, never, ever, ever surrender. He meant it. So the British people, they were all in, Today, who knows?
Yeah.
Different times, different generations, but
different character.
So Britain hanging on, and with the Lend-Lease, we were right there helping them. We were there, giving all types of financial, military.
You just remind me
aid.
something when you say we never surrender. And I remember one time hearing to a television the way Churchill was saying, "Never surrender," and that was with the sounds and those two words, they became like the leading ideology, so that the soldier will fight with all their souls into it.
He was a unique guy.
Yes.
He almost died as a kid.
Yes, I agree.
He almost drowned. Same person saved him.
Same person.
Same
Wow.
person, yep. I don't remember his name, but my understanding is he went on to invent penicillin. His parents, Churchill was wealthy, his parents, they paid for his education. When he was, he almost drowned as a kid.
Wow.
And his kid saved them. So, but getting back to, so, you know, the largest amphibious force ever assembled, you know, the invasion of Normandy. Now, Normandy has 5 beaches, okay?
Yes.
5 of them. British were assigned to some, and Americans, Canadians, so on. Juno, Sword, Gold, Utah, Omaha. Those 5 beaches made up Normandy. So, and there were a lot of local guys. I mean, my boxing coach when I was a kid, he was part of the force in Normandy. Baseball coach, he was part of it. Just many, you know, it was the most heroic act. It was delayed because of the weather. And finally, Eisenhower said, you know, we're going June 6, 1944. That's D-Day. And so, you know, it was the overwhelming odds. You remember now, Germans were up on cliffs, firing down at them, at all the troops. But they ultimately they prevailed. They made headway, and they were able to get their foot first time into Europe, France. And so that the war was not much longer. People don't remember. The war ended in May of 45. They landed there June 6th. The war ended, I believe, May 8th. About 11 months later, the war was over. That's how quick the Allies were. 11 months today, well, I mean, look at Russia now and Ukraine.
Yes,
So
it's 2 years.
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years, that's
Over
right.
2 years. And that battlefield was probably 10 times the size of what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, but it went quick. So, you know, Hitler's last attempt was the Battle of the Bulge, you know, so-called, in December 44 through January, but they broke through it, January, I believe, early February of 45. Then it was just a march to Berlin, you know. Soviets were coming in from the east, the Allies from the west. You know, Germany was done. But the amphibious invasion, largest ever to this day in Normandy, you know. And they got the cemetery over there. President Reagan was there in 1984. It's quite a sight to see.
Yeah, it seems that all presidents visiting the cemetery, except one, because it was raining.
I have no comment. No comment.
Okay, I understand. But we know.
Yeah,
We know anyway.
No comment.
so-
Go ahead.
But yes, what about the French resistance? That it seems like they have a pretty good part in that battle too, especially in Paris.
Throughout it's like the Italian resistance.
Yes.
Yeah, the homegrown fighters, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, General de Gaulle, who later became president, he was the de facto leader of that. You know, he got into some arguments, major arguments with you know, Patton and a few others. You know, on the direction. You know, he had an ego. Every general has an ego.
Oh yes.
You know,
Big
I
ones.
mean, that's just the way it is. You know.
That's right. They are generals, right?
Yeah. Well, they want the glory. You know, so they fight for the glory. So, but he was, you know, he was instrumental in France getting their liberation as well, you know. Obviously, without the Allies, he wasn't doing anything, you know. You remember Dunkirk, the British troops were trapped in 1940, and they're lucky they made it out of there.
Yeah,
So
there
they
was
lived
a
to fight
miracle.
another day, yeah. So, but when Hitler went into France, the world was shocked how quick he took it.
Yes.
You know, it was fast.
And as you mentioned, the Italian allied, the Italian partisans, they actually held back 11 German divisions from the front. And Sandro Pertini, being one of the Italian presidents in the 80s, he was one of the leader of the partisans too. So there is some similarity with France, it seems like. Yes, we could even be called Italian and French cousins. Sometimes we love each other, and sometimes we fight.
Well,
Just like cousins.
yeah, you're on the same continent.
Yes.
You know, same landmass. You know,
Yes.
I get it, you know.
So is there something you can tell me about North Africa that
Well, North
you
Africa
would like
was
to mention?
that was the test. I mean, the first major battles. General Rommel from Germany the Desert Fox, his name was.
Yeah.
Um,
Good general. Very
Yeah.
short. Very good
Patton,
soldier.
General George S. Patton, probably the
Another good
most
one. Yes.
well-known general.
Yeah.
Him and MacArthur. I mean, I
Yes.
can't say who was, they both were fantastic generals. But Germany was getting the earlier victories in the North African campaign, they called it. The oil, that's why they were there, everybody wanted the oil. Libya was huge in that fight. So after, I believe it was 1942, might have been Al Alamein, I forget, but early 43, late 42, the tide started turning. And ultimately, Germany was beaten in North Africa relatively quick. And then that's how the Allies were able to get into, started with Sicily, Palermo, and those, different areas.
The invasion.
Southern Italy, they came up on, exactly, from Africa. So, but the North African campaign was huge for a lot of reasons. Oil,
Yeah.
Italy, the aspect of, the Roman Catholic Church.
Yes.
The Pope was, obviously, no one was a fan of Hitler, nor Mussolini at that time. Because Mussolini allied himself with Germany. Okay?
Yes.
So,
Well, wasn't Mussolini not quite a fan of Hitler, but he saw him more as the only nation left that he could ally to pursue his idea of grandiosity?
he was an opportunist. I
Okay.
mean, everybody, what can you do for me?
That's
Hitler
right.
looked at him probably the same way. What can he do for us?
So it's always like a dictator that thinks only
Yeah.
about himself.
Of course.
They say
End of the
one thing
day,
is-
it's always about self-interest for them.
Yeah.
So,
consolidating their position, make sure that no one's get to them to kill them, so they mistrust everybody. That's
Yeah,
the life of a dictatorship, I suppose.
I think, Mussolini clearly wasn't at Hitler's level, obviously.
Even though Hitler called him as his teacher.
Yeah,
But
I'm talking
evidently
about
the student beat the
I'm
teacher.
talking about evilness. As
Oh,
far as
yeah.
evil designs, there's no comparison. Hitler was top of the charts. Stalin as well.
Yes.
People forget Stalin slaughtered over 20 million of his own people.
Yeah.
In Ukraine, the 30s, the forced collectivization of the farms.
I-
Millions of Ukrainians were slaughtered.
Yeah. Is it true that Stalin, from all the veterans of the war, when they were coming back, is it true that he killed almost 1 million of them because he was afraid that they will become capitalistic?
Yes, and he was also leery and weary of Zhukov, General Zhukov, the great Soviet general, who was the
Built
main
them out,
architect
actually,
of
yeah.
the victory. So Zhukov was very popular with the Russian people. So Stalin was paranoid, so he made sure Zhukov would never, ever, ever attain power,
So they're devious, these guys.
Oh, absolutely. They're not nice guys.
And anything you can tell us about the Middle East? That wasn't probably as deadly as the other wars, I suppose. I don't know.
but the Mufti of Jerusalem at the time, he actually met with Hitler.
Huh?
The Mufti of Jerusalem, he's like the leader. He met with Hitler. They pictured, they have photos of it. I think he met in Germany, and he wanted Hitler to. They had a small force that was in the German army, but he wanted Hitler to, quote unquote, implement his policies regarding the Jewish people in the Middle East, and Hitler told him no. He wasn't ready for it, So I think he was called the Grand Mufti, M-U-F-T-I. And so
Grand Mufti.
Yeah, he met with them. They met. And so it was, the Middle East, the area itself, Palestine, wasn't fought over, but ultimately that went back to World War I, as I said earlier. The British mandate promised both, you fight for us, we'll give you dual states,
Yeah.
and that's called the Balfour Declaration, and the Secretary of State of Britain, and Israel took them up on it after World War II. You know?
Yeah, took that long. Yeah,
Yeah, it took a long time. Yeah, took over
So-
20, 30 years.
It seems like that to me now, personally, it seems like that some of those grand government states plan, they project into generation more than into a short term and finish and try to solve it.
Absolutely. I
But
mean,
how can they do that if another generation is on power, maybe with different principle?
because they try to instill the ideology of it
Excuse me.
through the education system. Get the kids. So the whole Soviet system is built on kids.
Oh,
When it's Lenin, Stalin, get education. You instill it when they're kids. You put the ideology in their heads. Okay, elementary school, junior high. And it's happening in our country. Whether people want to admit it or not. We never had this. You look at what's going on now in these campuses. This was unthinkable a generation ago. Now you can say, well, Vietnam. Vietnam was a war, though. We were involved in a war.
and what university there was the bigger protest that the students they got shot by the police?
Oh, Kent State?
Kent State?
1970, Kent
Yes.
State, yeah.
I thought not Columbia.
No, Kent State in
Kent State.
1970. They got
So
shot.
they
yeah.
died.
National Guard, yeah.
So that doesn't sound to be much of a democracy if they're using their guns.
Well, I guess. I mean, I don't know all the facts what happened
Yeah.
there. I don't know if the
That's
riots
more
were happening.
politics
I don't
than-
know. Maybe they prematurely fired. I don't know.
Maybe somebody has one shot and then
Yeah,
the rest of it
I mean,
just shoots at will.
Yeah, but
What's this? What happened now in Colombia? This is to Columbia University. This
yeah,
is,
it's not good what's
this-
happening. It's just, it's not good.
what do you think should have been done over there instead to send the police and do all whatever they did, beating the students, take them out, ripping the tent?
What now?
Yes. Do you think that it's the right thing to do, or maybe could have been done on a less eclatant way?
Well, you have your First Amendment, obviously. Okay, the First Amendment, free speech. But speech has limits. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. A great classic statement by the Supreme Court. So, there's a fine line between speech and conduct. Conduct's protected, but violent conduct isn't. Okay. You can hold signs and whatnot. No, I'm not privy to what's going on in these universities. I'm not there on the ground, but I think they've held back. They've used measured force. If needed, but I mean, they've dialogue. Obviously, you have to use dialogue. We're humans, so you have to talk. I just remember recently, 4 years ago, Seattle and some other cities. During COVID, during that summer of 20, they had a block of Seattle taken over.
Yeah, they
Enough's
did.
enough. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have the answers. It's a very complex dynamic going on. Emotions are very high.
Very fluid.
Yeah.
Goes back and well, Tom, what about the last thought of the day? On a personal basis, if you prefer, or into a more official way, as a man of the law?
Well, I think World War II is still very important. It affects what occurred during it, the principles that it was fought for. You have to remember, Germany was very dark. The American way of life, Constitution, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Hitler would have none of that. So we were fighting that war. That's why the American people were so for it, because it was our way of life. The way of life of freedom, of happiness, self-expression, our Bill of Rights, everything that America stood for, the good in the world. Okay?
The Constitution.
Constitution, and that's why we had such a galvanization of all forces in the U.S. supporting the war. Unheard of what happened in Vietnam.
Yeah.
20 years later, protests and whatnot. Because that was a moral war, pretty much, World War II. It was a moral as much as it was military. Okay,
Yes.
the principles of civilized world were at stake. And
Two way of thinking
exactly.
colliding.
And civilized world prevailed.
Civilized one.
I believe it was Churchill said if Hitler prevails, there'll be 1,000 years of darkness.
Yeah.
He may have been right.
He was right, and thank God he also foresee it correctly.
Yeah.
And well, what the Vietnam War, it was a mistake, if we would like to say, maybe.
To be kind.
Yes. So, I mean, would be a lot of stuff to say about the Vietnam War, but we ran out of time.
Luckily so.
That's it. And Tom, it was a pleasure to have you here with me. This discussion, it was very nice. I like it, and thank you for your time. And I hope to have you here for the second part of this video, which that's the Pacific Theater. With all your knowledge, I thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure.
And living room, kitchen, dining room, whatever place in your home you're watching this one, I thank you for it. I hope we didn't annoy you. And until next time, this is the Disgruntled Italian. Say arrivederci.